My name is Liam, and for 26 years, I've been living in the shadow of Anya. Anya, my older sister, the firstborn, the sun around which our family revolved. I was planetary dust, orbiting much, much further out. I was the spare, the one expected to dim my own light so hers could shine brighter. It started with birthdays. Anya's were lavish, overflowing with balloons, a mountain of cake, and gifts that probably cost more than my beat-up car is worth today. Mine? Smaller gatherings, a single-layer cake, and presents that screamed budget-friendly. It wasn't spoken, but the message was deafening. Anya was simply more. Her milestones mattered more. She went to Crestwood Academy, a private school with tutors, equestrian lessons, and God knows what other fancy extracurriculars. I went to the public school, scrambling to keep up in classes packed so tight they felt like sardine cans, praying the teachers would notice me. When Anya turned 16, she got a brand new silver convertible. 2 years later, I was told to start saving for a used junker, if I really wanted one. Anya has more responsibilities, they'd say. She deserves more. That was the mantra, the twisted family tradition. Firstborns ruled. Seconds? We just existed. I tried. God, I tried to believe it. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I should be grateful. So I kept my head down, worked hard, and tried not to ask for much. But the truth burned. I was an afterthought, a prop in Anya's perfectly curated life. Then I turned 18, and reality hit me like a goddamn freight train. Anya got into Blackwood University, an Ivy League school that costs more per year than my entire future seemed worth. My parents practically orgasmed with pride. Tuition covered, dorm room furnished to perfection, a monthly allowance bigger than my bi-weekly paycheck. Anya had it all. A week later, I sat them down, my heart hammering in my chest. I had applied to State University, a decent school but affordable. I wasn't asking for everything Anya got, just some help. They handed me a stack of job listings, the glossy paper mocking my hopes. You're an adult now, Liam. Time to contribute, just like that. No discussion, no compromise, no fucking consideration. Then came the kicker. Rent, my father said, his voice flat. If you want to stay here, you need to pay your share. Rent. While Anya lived in her Blackwood dorm, paid for by them, I was supposed to pay rent in the house I grew up in. I barely had time to process the fury bubbling inside me before I was working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over my head. Late night shifts at a gas station, early morning classes at community college. Every penny went to rent, food, and tuition. My parents? They'd shrug and say I should be proud to lighten their load. Anya, of course, found the whole thing hilarious. Home for the holidays, she'd make snide remarks about how tired I looked, how I should just ask Mom and Dad for help, like she did, as if she didn't know the game they played, as if she didn't relish every single advantage she had. The final blow came when I turned 20. I'd finally saved enough to move out, transfer to State U, and get the hell out of that house. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Then came the family discussion. Anya had decided to go to grad school. Med school, to be exact, at another ridiculously expensive university. My parents were already drowning in debt. Loans piled on loans to keep Anya afloat. They had maxed out everything. Now, with their finances teetering on the edge of collapse, they turned to me. They expected me to take out more loans in my name so Anya wouldn't have to worry about debt. When I refused, the explosion was biblical. Selfish, my mother screamed, her face red. Ungrateful, a disgrace to the family. Anya is working towards something great, my father roared. You should be happy to support her. That was it. I broke. Something inside me shattered, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was done. The next morning, I withdrew every dollar I had, packed my bags, and left. No warning, no goodbye. I changed my number, deleted my social media, and vanished. The first thing I did? Legally changed my last name. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chained to them. I was no longer a Taylor. I was Liam Walker. The first few years were hell. I struggled, I hustled, I rebuilt everything from the ground up, but I was free. No more family obligations, no more crushing expectations, no more being treated like the disposable second son. I graduated, got a decent job, and started building a life where I wasn't constantly compared to Anya, where I wasn't just an afterthought. And for 6 glorious years, I had peace. Until last week, I was at my desk, slogging through spreadsheets, when the email arrived. The subject line, "I need your help." My blood turned to ice. It was from Anya. Over the years, I'd heard whispers through distant relatives that Anya's business, a goddamn biotech startup, wasn't exactly thriving. Investors were pulling out, creditors were circling, and she was hemorrhaging money faster than she could print business cards. At first, she'd kept up appearances, the perfect CEO, flashing her smile to the cameras and promising world-changing breakthroughs. But then, even our parents couldn't fund her delusions. The facade crumbled. Now she was desperate, and, for the first time in her life, she needed me. The email was long, rambling, almost hysterical. She went on and on about how things had gone wrong, how her company had failed, how she was drowning in debt. The bank was repossessing her house, her reputation in tatters. It was all her. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some kind of spam, or maybe she'd meant to send it to someone else. But then she started dropping details from our childhood, things only Anya would know. A stupid game we used to play in the woods behind our house, the name of her imaginary friend. And then, right at the end, she dropped the bomb. Our parents were struggling. She didn't say how or why, just that they were having a really hard time, and since I had a good life now, it was my turn to step up. I read the email twice, 3 times. Then I shut my laptop, got up, and walked away. For hours, I wandered around my apartment, trying to ignore the knot twisting in my gut. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, got the better of me. I went digging. It didn't take long to find out what had really happened. Anya's company had been built on a foundation of lies and overblown promises. She'd secured initial funding by showcasing flashy demos and bragging about revolutionary breakthroughs that didn't actually exist. At first, she'd gotten away with it. Then, the cracks started to show. Unpaid bills, failed clinical trials, lawsuits piling up faster than she could shred the evidence. Eventually, the whole house of cards collapsed, leading to scathing articles, angry forum posts, and even a few segments on the local news exposing her fraud. Apparently, she'd been running some kind of investment scheme, promising investors astronomical returns. The usual bullshit, flashy marketing, expensive suits, and a surplus of confidence. Turned out, the whole thing was shady as hell. Investors lost their shirts, lawsuits were filed, and the SEC got involved. Anya was left with nothing but debt and a tarnished reputation. And my parents? Well, they'd been funding her delusional dreams from the start. For years, they had poured every cent they had into Anya's business, fully convinced their golden child was destined for greatness. Now, they were broke, their retirement accounts emptied, and their house on the verge of foreclosure. They wanted me to clean up their mess. It was almost funny. My whole life, I'd been told I wasn't worth investing in, that Anya was the future, that all the sacrifices were necessary to support her potential. And now, they wanted me to bail them out. I deleted the email. The next day, my phone started buzzing. Unknown number? I ignored it. Another call, another, then a text. We need to talk. Please pick up. It was my mother. I hadn't heard her voice in years. I played the voicemail. The saccharine sweetness, the carefully crafted guilt. I recognized it instantly. She didn't acknowledge the past, didn't ask how I was doing. She just launched straight into, "We're still family, Liam." I stopped listening. For the next week, the messages kept coming. Different numbers, different attempts to manipulate me. Anya sent another email, shorter and angrier. She accused me of abandoning the family, of turning my back on them when they needed me most. I ignored it. Then, my parents sent their own version of an apology. They admitted they'd made mistakes. They could have treated me better. But no actual sorry. They just kept circling back to the same tired line. Family sticks together. I finally responded, a single sentence that had been building inside me for years. I am not your backup plan. The next day, another email. An ultimatum. If I really cared about family, I would come home and help. If I didn't, they would know where I stood. That made things easy. I cut off every avenue they had to reach me. Emails, phone numbers, even mutual connections who tried to guilt me into just talking to them. Of course, it wasn't as simple as pressing a button. Some relatives tried reaching out in person, showing up at my apartment or work. Others used burner phones and fake social media accounts. But I held firm. My boundaries were non-negotiable. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, Anya was standing outside. The second I saw her, I knew things had gone from bad to worse. Anya didn't look like the sister I remembered. Her expensive clothes, once the kind she'd flaunt in my face, were wrinkled and stained. Dark circles gouged her eyes, and her hair looked like she hadn't brushed it in days. For the first time in her life, she looked defeated. She tried to step forward, but I didn't move. I blocked the doorway. At first, she tried to act like this was just another casual conversation, like we were siblings catching up after years apart. Liam, it's been so long. How are you? But her voice wavered, her eyes darted nervously. She wasn't here for a friendly reunion. She was desperate. She started talking fast, about how bad things had gotten, how her parents were struggling, how she had no one else, how I was the only one who could fix this. It wasn't even a request, it was an expectation. I didn't say a word, didn't invite her in. That's when the guilt trip started. She talked about how Mom and Dad were barely getting by, how they had sacrificed everything for both of us. Not just her, apparently, how family sticks together, and how I was making things harder than they needed to be. I still didn't move. Then, her voice changed. She went from pleading to frustrated, her face contorting like she couldn't believe I wasn't immediately caving in, like I was the one being difficult. She said I was selfish, that I was turning my back on family, that my little grudge had gone on long enough. I finally responded. I reminded her of everything. Every single thing our parents had done, how they'd never treated me as an equal, how I'd been thrown out at 18 with nothing, while she'd been handed the world on a silver platter, how I'd spent years scraping by while she lived like royalty. Her response? A shrug. That's just how things were, Liam. You should have understood that. That was it. That was all she had to say. No remorse, no regret, just the same entitled attitude she'd always had. That I was supposed to accept being treated like less, because that's what had been decided for me. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I just felt done. I told her she needed to leave. That's when the meltdown happened. She started ranting, saying I would regret this, that I was making a huge mistake, that I had let outsiders turn me against my own family, that I was just bitter because she'd always been more successful. That last part almost made me laugh. I let her talk. I let her throw every insult she could think of. Then I told her something I should have said years ago. Our past didn't mean anything anymore. Whatever relationship we had as kids, whatever bond she thought we shared, was over the moment I walked away from that house. I stopped being their safety net. I owed her nothing. Her face turned red, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed off. An hour later, I got a final email from my parents. They were deeply disappointed in me. I blocked them. I thought it was over. I was wrong. The next day, a mutual acquaintance reached out. Apparently, Anya and my parents weren't done with me yet. They had a new plan to drag me back in, and it was worse than I could have imagined. It started with a single message from a former classmate, someone I hadn't spoken to in a decade. "Hey Liam, heard you're doing really well." "Congratulations." Confused, I replied. "Thanks. Things are good." Then came the follow-up, dripping with thinly veiled curiosity. "So, what exactly do you do? I heard you made some really smart investments." I brushed it off, thinking it was just an innocent attempt at networking. But then another message arrived, this time from a distant relative, "Liam, it's your Aunt Carol. Your mother told me you've been very successful. We're all so proud. But things are a little tight right now. Any chance you could lend me a small amount?" My blood ran cold. This wasn't a coincidence. I started noticing a pattern. Messages from distant relatives asking vague questions about my finances. Some hinted that I had done well for myself, while others outright asked if I had hit the jackpot. Confused and increasingly alarmed, I asked around. That's when I found out the truth. Anya and my parents were spreading a lie. They were telling people I was secretly rich, hoarding money while they suffered. When I confronted it publicly, posting a vague but pointed message on social media about people spreading false rumors, it only fueled the fire. "Whatever money I have was earned, not handed to me," I wrote. "And I owe no one anything." It only made them double down. They weren't just telling people I was doing well. They were making it sound like I'd won the lottery, inherited millions from a mysterious benefactor, or struck gold in the crypto market. The details changed with each telling, but the core message remained the same. Liam Walker was swimming in cash, and he was refusing to help his poor, struggling family. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't heard from in years crawled out of the woodwork, their hands outstretched. They weren't asking how I was. They weren't checking in after years of silence. They were demanding I do the right thing. Some were subtle, inquiring about my work, subtly hinting at their own financial woes. Others were outright aggressive, accusing me of turning my back on family. One particularly delusional relative even sent me their bank details and asked for a small loan of $10,000. At first, I was baffled. Then, I stumbled upon Anya's social media. She'd been posting cryptic messages about betrayal, talking about how family should stick together and how money changes people. She painted herself as a victim, the struggling older sister abandoned by a heartless sibling who had it all. My parents weren't much better. They made a public Facebook post writing about how some children forget where they come from once they reach success. The comments section was a cesspool of relatives and old family friends eating up every word, condemning me as a heartless monster. I called Anya. The second she picked up, I demanded to know why she was spreading lies about me. She didn't even bother denying it. Instead, she smugly replied, "Well, maybe if you acted like family, we wouldn't have to tell people this, Liam." That was it. That was their plan. They weren't just after money. They wanted control. They wanted to pressure me into stepping back into my old role, the lesser sibling who existed to sacrifice for the family. They thought if they backed me into a corner, I would crack. They were wrong, I told her. If you think I have money, then go ahead and sue me for it. Otherwise, leave me the fuck alone. Then, I hung up and started blocking people. Every single person who messaged me, guilt tripped me, or demanded I help got blocked. I deleted old contacts, removed distant relatives from my social media, and cut off every avenue they had to reach me. But I wasn't taking any chances. A lawyer friend who'd seen situations like this spiral out of control advised me to take legal precautions. He told me to watch for identity theft attempts, fake credit applications, and any financial moves made in my name. I thought he was being paranoid. Then the letter came. It was an official legal notice, claiming that Anya and my parents were suing me. The reason? Unjust enrichment. According to them, I had benefited from family resources as a child, food, shelter, basic necessities, and now that I was doing well, I owed them back compensation for everything they had given me. They were demanding a large sum of money, claiming that without their sacrifices, I would never have been able to build a life for myself. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so pathetic. So legally insane, I took the document straight to my lawyer. The moment he read it, he shook his head. "This has no legal standing, Liam. It's a cash grab, plain and simple. They're trying to intimidate you into paying them off. So what do?" I asked, my voice tight. "We fight back," he replied, his eyes hardening. "We take this seriously. Not because they can win, but because if you don't respond, they'll drag this out and make your life a living hell." We prepared a counterattack. A formal legal response was drafted, completely dismissing their claims and warning that if they pursued this further, they could be held responsible for my legal fees. Then, things took an unexpected turn. I had kept everything quiet. No public posts, no dramatic pronouncements. But somehow, word got out. Distant relatives, old acquaintances, even people who had once sided with Anya and my parents found out what they were doing, and they were livid. The entire family's reputation started to crumble. The same relatives who had been guilt-tripping me weeks ago were now turning on Anya and my parents. Some reached out to apologize for believing the lies. Others sent screenshots of family group chats where people were openly mocking the lawsuit. Even people who had never taken an interest in my life before were suddenly reaching out, saying things like, "I can't believe they would do this to their own son." Then, Anya made a huge mistake. She started deleting her social media accounts. All the posts about family betrayal, gone. The cryptic messages about how money changes people, deleted. It was too late. Screenshots had already been shared, and the fact that she was trying to erase everything made her look even worse. Meanwhile, my parents were in full panic mode. They had completely miscalculated how people would react. They assumed that by making me look like the villain, the family would rally around them. Instead, they were getting called out left and right. That's when the desperate calls started. One voicemail after another begging me to settle, claiming they never meant for things to go this far. They pleaded with me to just give them something so this wouldn't ruin the family's name. I didn't respond. Then, Anya tried backtracking. She sent me an email saying this was all just a misunderstanding, that my parents were the ones pushing for the lawsuit, that she had no choice but to go along with it. She even hinted that if I agreed to a private settlement, she could convince them to drop it. It was the same manipulation tactics they had used my entire life. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. He sent a formal counter notice. If they didn't withdraw the lawsuit immediately, we would pursue defamation charges. Within 48 hours, the case was dropped. And the best part? Anya and my parents were now stuck with my legal fees. The lawsuit had backfired completely. They had thought they could scare me into paying them off. Instead, they ended up with an even bigger financial mess. Then, the final message came. An email from my parents. They claimed they had learned their lesson, that they regretted what had happened. But between the lines, I could see the same old pattern, the unspoken expectation that an apology was enough to erase everything. And, of course, it came with a request for financial help. I responded with 2 words, "Not happening." Then, I blocked them. For good! Weeks passed. For the first time in years, everything was quiet. No emails, no calls, no sudden visits. Just peace. Then, just when I thought they had finally given up, another red flag showed itself. I got a call from my bank. They had flagged suspicious activity on my account, multiple failed login attempts, and an unauthorized attempt to change my password. The representative on the phone sounded deeply concerned, asking if I had recently tried to access my account from an unfamiliar location. I hadn't. Then, she hit me with the part that made my stomach drop. Someone had answered my old security questions correctly. Not just any questions, but family-related ones. The name of my first pet, the street I grew up on, my mother's maiden name. Only one group of people could possibly have known those answers. Freeze my accounts, I told the bank, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. Immediately, within minutes, I was locked out of everything: credit cards, savings, even the emergency fund I had built over the years. I spent the next hour changing every password I had, switching security questions, and enabling two-factor authentication on every single account I owned. Then, I called my lawyer. Again! The bank took the fraud attempt seriously, launching an investigation into the unauthorized login attempts. A few weeks later, they contacted me with a chilling update. The attempted access came from a known location, my parents' home. It wasn't just guilt-tripping or legal threats anymore. They had actually tried to steal from me. I sent a single message to my parents: I know what you did. You have 24 hours to return any stolen money, or I'm pressing charges. The denial came almost instantly. They acted shocked, claimed they had no idea what I was talking about, said there must be a mistake. Then Anya messaged me. She admitted she had tried to access my account, but not to steal. According to her, she was just trying to check my finances so she could help mom and dad. I told her exactly what it was called: fraud. And I promised her there would be consequences. That's when I filed the police report. With the bank's cooperation and the clear digital evidence, Lucy was brought in for questioning. The golden child, the one who had been handed everything her whole life. Now she was finally facing real consequences. The moment Lucy was taken in for questioning, my family lost their minds. My parents went into full panic mode, immediately starting damage control. Their first excuse? Someone must have framed her. They claimed an outsider must have used their home's Wi-Fi to access my accounts, that Lucy had nothing to do with it. That excuse didn't last long. The bank records didn't lie. The police had clear digital evidence tying Lucy directly to the attempted fraud. When confronted, her defense was pathetic. She claimed she was just checking my accounts to see if I actually had money because she wanted to borrow some. That's right. She tried to hack into my bank account because she wanted to see if I could afford to bail her out. And somehow, in her mind, that wasn't a crime. Despite my parents begging and pleading, the authorities refused to drop the case. That's when my parents tried to bribe me, sending a message through a mutual connection offering me money from Lucy's failed business if I dropped the charges. It was almost comical. They were so desperate that they were willing to hand over what little they had left just to save Lucy. I sent back a simple response: you had no problem trying to steal from me. Now deal with the consequences. Then, Lucy's real betrayal came to light. A cousin reached out with information I hadn't known before. Apparently, for months, Lucy had been bad-mouthing me behind my back, telling people I was selfish, greedy, and heartless. At the same time, she was secretly planning to steal from me. So, not only had she tried to hack into my accounts, but she had been playing the victim while doing it. Then, my mother had her final public meltdown. She posted a long Facebook rant about how no child should ever turn against their family, how I had abandoned them, how Lucy didn't deserve this, how I was being cruel for letting my own sister suffer. But this time, it didn't work. Some extended family members finally called her out. They told her she was wrong, that no matter what, theft was inexcusable. And Lucy? She started losing everything. Her friends abandoned her. Her business partners cut her off. Her name became toxic. My parents, realizing they had run out of options, made one last excuse. They started telling people that Lucy was mentally unwell, that she had been struggling for a long time, that she wasn't in the right state of mind when she did what she did. They wanted sympathy. They didn't get it, because, at the end of the day, the law didn't care. Lucy was officially charged with attempted fraud. My parents sent one final message. They begged me, one last time, to drop everything. They told me this would ruin Lucy's life. I sent one last text to Lucy. You ruined your own life the moment you tried to steal from me. We're done! Forever. Then I blocked them all. The legal case against Lucy moved quickly. With clear evidence of attempted fraud, she had no real defense. The prosecution didn't even have to try hard. Bank records, IP logs, and her own pathetic excuse of I was just checking if I could borrow money sealed her fate. She was convicted and ordered to pay restitution for damages. But there was a problem. Lucy didn't have the money. So, the financial collapse of my parents began in earnest. The legal fees alone had already drained them, but now they were responsible for covering what Lucy couldn't pay. A cousin, one of the few relatives who still occasionally reached out, dropped a bombshell. My parents were on the verge of losing their house. Apparently, over the years, they had poured everything into Lucy. Every spare dollar, every financial decision. It had all been about keeping her afloat, believing she was destined for success. But she wasn't, and now they had nothing left. Lucy had to move back in with them. Unemployed, disgraced, and now a convicted fraudster. Even the few relatives who had originally supported them started cutting ties. No one wanted to be associated with people who had tried to scam their own family. Meanwhile, I was doing the exact opposite. I thrived. I had a stable career, good friends, a peaceful life. I had left behind all the drama, all the guilt, all the manipulation. Then, out of nowhere, my parents made one last pathetic attempt. A handwritten letter arrived at my home. They claimed they still loved me, that they wanted to fix things, that they regretted what had happened. I didn't even open it. I tossed it in the fireplace and watched it burn. A year passed. Then, out of nowhere, Lucy reached out again. A LinkedIn message. She wanted to talk. I blocked her instantly. I didn't even read the full message. By then, word had spread that my parents had lost most of their friends due to their lies and manipulations. Lucy's reputation was destroyed forever. No one wanted to work with her. No one wanted to associate with her. And me? I had closure. For the first time in my life, I was completely free. No baggage, no family expectations, just peace. And in the end, that was the ultimate revenge. The years after Lucy's conviction were eerily silent. No desperate calls, no guilt-laden emails, no more surprise visits. Just nothing. It was as if they had finally accepted that I was truly gone from their lives. I tried to tell myself that I was happy, that I had finally broken free from the toxic cycle that had defined my childhood. I had a good job, a comfortable apartment, and a circle of friends who loved and supported me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. But sometimes, late at night, when the city outside my window fell silent, I would find myself wondering if my parents were okay, wondering if Lucy had managed to turn her life around, wondering if I had done the right thing. These moments of doubt were fleeting, quickly suppressed by the memories of their betrayal, their manipulation, their constant favoritism. But they were there, lurking in the shadows of my mind, a constant reminder of the family I had left behind. One evening, I received an invitation to a friend's wedding. It was a lavish affair, held at a beautiful vineyard outside the city. As I celebrated with my friends, watching the happy couple exchange vows, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness. I thought about the family weddings I had attended as a child, the awkward small talk with distant relatives, the forced smiles, the feeling of being an outsider in my own family. I realized that while I had escaped the toxicity, I had also lost the sense of belonging that most people take for granted. I pushed these thoughts aside, determined to enjoy the rest of the evening. But as I danced with my friends, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. That despite all my success, all my freedom, I was still haunted by the ghost of my family. One afternoon, years after I had cut off all contact, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello?" There was a long pause, followed by a weak, raspy voice. "Liam? Is that you, Liam?" My heart skipped a beat. I knew that voice. It was my mother. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. What do you want? She began to cry softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Liam, I don't have much time. Your father, he's very sick, my breath caught in my throat. What's wrong with him? It's his heart, she said, her voice breaking. He needs surgery, but we don't have the money. The insurance won't cover it. And Lucy can't help. I remained silent, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to hang up, to shut out the pain and the guilt. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, the part that still longed for a family, couldn't bring myself to do it. Why are you calling me? I asked, my voice cold. You haven't spoken to me in years. Why now? Because you're his son, Liam, she said, her voice pleading. You're the only one who can help. Please, I'm begging you. Don't let him die. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking. I paced around my apartment, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. My father, the man who had always put Anya first, the man who had dismissed and ignored me for most of my life, was dying, and my mother was asking me to save him. I spent the next few days wrestling with my conscience. Part of me wanted to ignore my mother's plea, to let my father face the consequences of his actions. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. But another part of me, the part that still held onto a glimmer of hope for reconciliation, couldn't bear the thought of him dying alone and forgotten. I thought about the few happy memories I had of him, the times he had taken me fishing, the stories he had read to me before bed, the rare moments when he had actually shown me affection. I knew that if I didn't help him, I would never be able to forgive myself. But I also knew that helping him would mean opening the door to a past I had worked so hard to escape. I confided in my closest friend, Sarah, telling her everything that had happened. She listened patiently, offering words of comfort and support. Liam, she said, you've been through so much. You deserve to be happy. Don't let them drag you back into their drama. I know, I said, but I can't just stand by and watch him die. Then help him, she said, but do it on your own terms. Don't let them manipulate you. Set clear boundaries and don't let them cross them. After much soul-searching, I decided to meet with my mother. I contacted her, telling her that I would consider helping, but only if she agreed to meet me in person, alone. She readily agreed, and we arranged to meet at a small coffee shop near my apartment. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She looked older and more frail than I remembered, her face etched with worry and sadness. As I sat down, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. Despite everything that had happened, she was still my mother. Thank you for coming, Liam, she said, her voice trembling. I'm not here to forgive you, I said, my voice cold. I'm here to hear what you have to say. She nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. She went on to explain the situation in more detail, telling me about my father's declining health, their mounting debts, and Lucy's inability to provide any financial assistance. We've made so many mistakes, Liam, she said, her voice breaking. We were so focused on Anya, on her success, that we neglected you. We're so sorry. We know we don't deserve your help, but please, just consider it. I remained silent, studying her face. I could see the genuine pain and regret in her eyes. For the first time, I began to believe that she truly understood the damage she had caused. I'll think about it, I said, standing up to leave. But don't expect anything. I need time to process this. After days of agonizing over the decision, I finally came to a conclusion. I would help my father, but not unconditionally. I would offer to pay for his surgery, but only if he and my mother agreed to certain terms. I contacted my lawyer, and together we drafted a legal agreement. The agreement stipulated that in exchange for my financial assistance, my parents would have to acknowledge their past mistakes, apologize for their treatment of me, and agree to seek professional counseling to address their toxic family dynamics. The agreement also stated that I would have no further obligation to provide financial support, and that any future contact between us would be on my terms. I sent the agreement to my mother, telling her that if they agreed to the terms, I would transfer the money for my father's surgery immediately. Days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing. I began to think that they had rejected my offer, that they were too proud to admit their mistakes. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. "We've signed the agreement, Liam," she said, her voice barely audible. "We're ready to do whatever it takes." I transferred the money for my father's surgery the next day. The surgery was successful, and he began a long and arduous recovery. During his recovery, my parents and I began to have limited contact. We started with brief phone calls, then progressed to short visits. It was awkward and uncomfortable at first, but slowly, cautiously, we began to rebuild our relationship. My parents started attending counseling sessions, where they were forced to confront their past behavior. They began to understand the damage they had inflicted on me, and they started to take responsibility for their actions. Lucy, however, remained resistant to change. She refused to attend counseling, and she continued to blame me for her problems. I realized that she was never going to accept responsibility for her mistakes, and I made the difficult decision to cut her out of my life completely. Over time, my relationship with my parents began to heal. It wasn't easy, and there were many setbacks along the way. But we persevered, determined to create a new, healthier dynamic. My parents started to show me the love and support that I had always craved. They attended my graduation, celebrated my achievements, and offered words of encouragement and advice. I began to see them not as the villains of my childhood, but as flawed human beings who had made mistakes. I realized that while they could never fully undo the past, they were genuinely trying to make amends. One day, my father called me. "Liam," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I want to thank you for saving my life and for giving us another chance." "You're welcome, Dad," I said, a tear rolling down my cheek. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly part of a family that loved and supported me, not because of what I could do for them, but because of who I was. Despite the progress we had made, the scars of the past still lingered. I knew that our relationship would never be perfect, that there would always be a part of me that remained guarded and skeptical. But I had learned to accept the imperfections, to focus on the present and the future, rather than dwelling on the past. I had learned that forgiveness was possible, but it was a long and difficult process. One evening, I received a message from an unknown number. Hesitantly, the first opened it. "Liam, it's Lucy. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need to tell you something." My heart sank. I considered ignoring the message, but curiosity got the better of me. "What is it?" I replied. "I'm sorry," she wrote, "for everything. I was wrong. You didn't deserve any of that." I stared at the message, stunned. I had never expected to hear those words from her. "I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me," she continued, "but I hope you can find some peace. You deserve it." I didn't reply. I wasn't sure if I believed her, if she was truly remorseful or just trying to manipulate me again. But I knew that I had finally found my own peace. I had forgiven my parents, and I had learned to let go of the anger and resentment that had consumed me for so long. Whether Lucy was sincere or not, it didn't matter. I was finally free. Years passed. My relationship with my parents continued to grow stronger. We spent holidays together, celebrated milestones, and supported each other through difficult times. I learned that family wasn't just about blood, it was about love, forgiveness, and acceptance. It was about choosing to be there for each other, even when it was difficult. One day, my father passed away peacefully in his sleep. I was devastated, but I took comfort in knowing that we had made amends, that I had been there for him in his final days. After his funeral, my mother handed me a small box. "Your father wanted you to have this," she said. I opened the box and found a collection of old photographs. There were pictures of me as a baby, pictures of me playing sports, pictures of me graduating from college. As I looked through the photographs, I realized that despite everything that had happened, my father had always loved me. He had just had a difficult time showing it. I closed the box, a tear rolling down my cheek. I knew that I would never fully understand my parents' choices, but I had learned to accept them for who they were. I had finally come to terms with my past, and I was ready to embrace my future. As I walked away from my mother's house, I looked up at the sky and smiled. I was no longer the shadow of Anya. I was Liam Walker, and I was finally free.